Yeah, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Great to have you here on our webinar on IR35 compliance that we hold with our business partners of Randstad, Vicoland, and OuterScore. And yeah, within the next hours, we are going with you through the legal implications of IR35, which came into force in April 2021. And also on the trends that we see going forward now with the new legislation in place. And you will all get a PDF copy of the presentation. And there will also be a recording of this webinar stream that we will circulate to the participants after the webinar. And for the last 10 minutes, we will be having a Q&A session, so please leave your questions in the chat section, which we are then happy to answer. And I will now hand over to my UK colleagues, Paul Callahan and Joe Aston, who will start with the short legal session and introduce themselves. So yeah, Paul, Joe.
Right. Thank you, Johannes. My name is Paul Callahan. I head up the employment law team here at Taylor Wessing in London, and my colleague Joe is a senior associate in the team, and we spend an awful lot of time advising clients who are concerned about IR35. So just to give you a bit of background before Joe goes into what you need to do in relation to the changes, and what is IR35? In fact, it's not something completely new. Basically, IR35 is something that applies for independent contractors who are using their own limited companies. So they have they will have their own service company. So rather than contract as independent contractors in their capacity as individuals, they'll have their own company. Now, IR35 applies where if the nature of their work is such that if it wasn't for the fact that they had their company, they would be an employee of the company they were providing services for, then the IR35 rule kicks in. And so that is the usual employee worker independent contractor test. In other words, how are they controlled in the way that they do things by the end user client? How much autonomy do they have? Do they have a genuine right of substitution? All the sort of things that you have to think about when you're deciding whether someone's a genuine independent contractor. And if in reality it's only the fact that they contract through their service company that makes them an independent contractor, then IR35 applies. And what that meant historically was that they have to account for PAYE on the money that they get paid gross for their consultancy services. They would then have to do their tax returns and account to HMRC from in relation to any tax that was due. And that obviously made it very straightforward for the end user client. They would simply pay gross, and the tax was the problem of the person providing services through their company. Well, there was a massive change in April this year when that was basically reversed. And so HMRC felt that too many independent contractors using these service companies weren't paying the right tax. And so instead of leaving it to the independent contractors to declare tax, they've shifted the burden so that in many cases, it's now the end user that has to pay the tax. And so that means that if IR35 applies in a particular case and you've got an independent contractor using one of these service companies, you will have to effectively put them on payroll and deduct taxes even though they're not your employees. And you will have the liability to pay those taxes. So if you paid them gross, then it's your problem and the revenue will come after you for the taxes and for any penalties and for any interest, and for employers' national insurance contributions, which are 13.8% at the moment. So in other words, overnight, the cost to you, if you're an end user company that uses independent contractors, went up by that whopping sum. And what you need to do what you are forced to do is an online test using what is called a CEST tool provided by the government to work out whether in fact the IR35 rules apply in a particular case. There is, however, a small business exemption. So you need to have 2 of the 3 criteria that are set out on this slide applying for you to be a small business and therefore not subject to these rules. You also need to have a place of business in the UK. Somebody just based in the US, for example, with no place of business in the UK other than a contractor that they use, even if they're not a small business, would not have to worry about the IR35 rules. But you can see the small employer exemption there: 50 or fewer employees, 10.2 million or less turnover. By turnover, we mean revenue, and 5.1 million or less on the annual balance sheet. And another point that might seem obvious but can be confusing is that IR35 is only going to apply to any contractors you have in the UK. So even if you're a UK-based company where you have contractors using their own company, but they're physically carrying out the work somewhere that isn't the UK, then IR35 is not going to apply to them either. Now I'll hand over to Joe, who'll talk you through how to make that status determination.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. So yeah, as Paul mentioned, in the event that IR35 is relevant to you, so you don't fall under the small business exemption, for example, you are going to be in a position where you, assuming you are the end user of the services, are going to be responsible for carrying out an analysis as to whether the services that are being provided to you through a limited company service provider do fall within or outside of IR35. Now, a key thing to be aware of is that IR35 is not a new thing. The changes that came into force in April only relate to who is responsible for the analysis of IR35. So the test for carrying out the analysis of whether an arrangement is that of employment or not is essentially the same as it always has been, and it's using the same kind of test, which again Paul has briefly sort of gone through. There is no legally prescribed method that you need to go through to do the analysis. However, in the majority of situations, most companies are best advised to have, at least as the starting point, the HMRC CEST tool. CEST stands for Check Employment Status for Tax. So as part of the sort of shake-up of IR35, one thing that is new or has certainly been developed by the government, by HMRC, is this specific test and tool that you can use to carry out the analysis as to whether IR35 should apply in a particular situation. And there's a link there to the tool. The reason it's good to use that in the vast majority of circumstances is that as long as you answer the questions that you're asked through the tool honestly, and they are accurately answered, you come out with a determination as to whether that arrangement will be inside or outside of IR35, and HMRC will stand behind that analysis as long as you've answered accurately. I won't go into a huge amount of detail about the actual tests that are used. Essentially, the tool will take you through a number of different questions to determine the level of control you have over the contractor and that kind of thing. It is worth mentioning at this point that Taylor Wessing, we have recently done a separate webinar which goes into the legal detail in quite a bit more detail than we are going through today. So if you want any more specific advice or input on the types of tests that are used and that kind of thing, just drop us an email and we can send you the link to our other webinar which goes through the test in a lot more detail. So, and just from a practical point of view, and again at a high level, what should companies be doing? Businesses that have any kind of contracting arrangements with limited companies need to be doing something. Indeed, they should really have already been doing something with effect from April. And really it's split into two different scenarios. So you either will have contractors already in place that you engage to limited companies and perhaps have not carried out a status determination and aren't paying tax on them because that was the position prior to April. In that situation, you know, as well as having to carry out the status determination, you should be looking at the contract itself and seeing what you are and are not able to do. So if you end up with a situation where you do the assessment and it falls within IR35, under the contract you have in place already, are you able to terminate the agreement, for example? Or are you contractually able to deduct from the pay that you owe to the contractor in respect of those income tax and national insurance contributions that you're going to have to make? So there's quite a large sort of project that needs to be gone through. It's not just carrying out the analyses. You need to be looking at the contracts you have in place already. The other thing to have a think about as well is the tax status of a contractor is technically separate to the employment status. And whilst the tests are sort of materially very similar, just because someone is an employee for tax purposes and you start running their pay through payroll, it doesn't automatically make them an employee for legal purposes. That being said, in quite a significant number of situations, it would be likely that the knock-on effect would be you are essentially accepting that they tick all of the right boxes from an employment law point of view as well. So you need to be thinking about, well, in addition to payrolling them and paying tax and national insurance, should we also be assessing them as employees for legal purposes and therefore bringing them onto employment contracts rather than paying them, rather than engaging them, continuing to engage them as a contractor? And you're going to have to deliver this message to the contractors and say to them, we are going to have to deduct tax and national insurance. And obviously a positive of that might be, well, you are also going to get employment rights as well. So in some ways, it's often a positive thing, if the option that is there to bring them on as employees, as well as as running them through payroll. So there's a wider context to be aware of, and it's not just the tax position that you need to be thinking about. It's whether realistically they should continue to be engaged as contractors or brought on as employees or as workers. And in terms of any new contractors with effect from April 2021, I guess from a practical point of view, you need to be ensuring all of your relevant managers, your finance team, your HR team are aware of what IR35 is and what it means and what has changed since April, and that they are not engaging contractors in the same way as they have done previously, with the protection that, oh, we can engage them via a limited company and we're safe from a tax point of view. So many of our clients have this issue at the moment where their HR people or their managers are so used to being able to engage people as contractors and use that buffer of the limited company and don't think about the other issues that are involved. So awareness is massively important. You have to carry out the status determination, but that needs to be done by someone who knows about the arrangement and about the relationship. So working out who the right person to do that assessment is. Should that be someone from compliance? Should it be someone from the tax team? Should it be an HR professional? And obviously that needs to be carried out prior to commencement of that contract. So again, making sure everyone's aware that before signing any agreements, they need to be doing this analysis and determining whether IR35 is going to apply. You may want to develop a specific status assessment checklist for your business that sort of draws on the kind of questions that the CEST tool asks you, and also have a process for how you then go about informing the consultant of the determination. So the important thing to be aware of is that you don't just have to do the analysis through the CEST tool. You also have to notify the contractor of what the outcome is, using what we call a status determination statement. And that will often be in the form of a letter that appends a copy of the outcome from CEST, for example, that says, for these reasons, we are deeming you inside IR35. And if you are a sort of intermediary, so supplying people to end users, you need to be thinking when you're tendering for work, should you be bearing the potential IR35 impact in mind when pricing things? So bear in mind there may be a situation where all of a sudden tax and national insurance is going to be have to be deducted prior to payment to the end user, and you also need to be making sure your business to business contracts are reviewed to take into account IR35 and the changes that they bring. And last thing to point out, you need to be keeping the IR35 assessment under review periodically, and particularly whenever the scope of work changes. You can't just do one status determination and then just rely on that forever. If anything changes, you need to do a new assessment. So that's a sort of whistle-stop tour of the legal, where we are legally. I'm going to hand over now to Randstad and Emma Johansson, and first Marianne Fenner.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Marianne Fenner. My colleague Emma Johansson and I are really excited to join you guys today. Emma and I belong to Operational Excellence within Randstad Sourceright, which supports all of our clients across Europe. And one of the major programs that we worked on over the last year was implementing IR35, not just across our own organisation, but also across all of our MSP client group. So today we want to take you through what and how we did this, what key trends and findings we found on that journey, and some key market trends post IR35 that we're seeing nowadays. So implementing IR35. Well, we were very fortunate to have some good lessons learnt to draw from when the UK government put a pause on IR35 right at the last minute in 2019 due to COVID. But the overwhelming feedback that we got from our clients at the time was that they wanted more time, more consultation and more guidance, whilst our own teams wanted a more standardized, uniform approach to make it much easier for them to guide and support their clients and their workers on their chosen IR35 journey. So sounds really simple. The reality of it was a little bit more complex. So Emma and I led an 11-month program together covering 19 clients from a whole variety of different industries, thousands of temp workers, hundreds of suppliers. We led 9 work streams, including finance, legal, payroll, and IT. And it utilized over 170 days of operational excellence resource. The objective, and we achieved that objective, was full IR35 compliance by April 2021 for each and every one of our clients, for all of our own temp workers, for our third-party agencies, plus all of their workers, and ensuring that the new front, middle and back office processes that we'd put in place internally were working and were fully robust, and that our internal teams, plus all of our clients, were educated on IR35. And I'm going to hand over to Emma, who will give you a little bit more detail on how we did that.
Hi, nice to meet you all. So how did RSR mobilise our IR35 programme? We were working with existing incumbent clients, but we were also working with other external clients who required IR35 consultative services. We pulled together an IR35 task force made up of subject matter experts with project management methodology experience, and we created a best-in-class IR35 toolkit that we were then able to customise and tailor to a client-specific approach to IR35. We sat with our clients to understand what their policies were and their processes were. Our toolkit consisted of template policies around a general IR35 approach to substitution, and we were able to tailor that according to the client's approach. The toolkit was made up of processes. It may be that we were discussing their approach to their appeals process. We had template communications around status determination statements, and we also had training material that we were then able to tailor specifically to that individual client approach, and we were able to educate their hiring manager community and their MSP community on the specific client approach to IR35. What did that timeline look like for our clients, and what journey did our project managers take our clients through? Really, the first 6 steps of this process focused on the timescale from August 2020 through to January 2021. And this was quite a paced program based on timelines and milestones within their project plan that really focused on designing that approach based upon the client's processes and policies. The real time and the real work was taken in steps 7 and 8, and the period was really January 21 to April 21, where we really focused on working very collaboratively with our hiring manager community. We conducted thousands of CEST determinations with our hiring manager community, issued thousands of status determination communications on behalf of our clients, and in our internal work streams issued hundreds of new contracts based on changed engagements in order for us to reach the compliance of April 2021. But the work didn't stop there. We're still going through programs now where we're analysing trends, where we are conducting audits on the compliance of our incumbent contractors, and also looking at what our business as usual processes should look like for any new engagements coming through. So talking of the high-level trends that we started to pull out following the implementation of the programme, we saw that 21% of our clients actually opted in favour of transitioning to a PAYE model only. They no longer engage with limited company contractors. And we saw that this featured quite heavily in the business and financial services sector. And actually, due to the volume of contractors we have in that particular area, we saw that 40% of our contractor population transitioned to a PAYE model in advance of the legislation coming into effect. Of the remaining contractor population, we saw that 43% of those contractors were limited company contractors and were in scope of a status determination statement and CEST determination on their engagement. And when we looked across some of those sectors, we weren't surprised to see that almost half of those were IT contractors in the tech workspace. And we were also not surprised to see that only 3% of those limited company contractors were in the banking and financial services industry, given that many of them had already transitioned across to PAYE models before. We also saw quite a high level of our clients, 84% of them were utilising the HMRC CEST tool to conduct their determinations. But because some of our larger clients utilised other tools within the market with larger volumes of contractors, we actually saw that over half of our contractor population were actually assessed using one of the other tools within the market. Of those contractors that needed assessed determination conducting, we found that 45% of those were deemed inside of scope of the legislation, and we needed to re-engage with them on an alternative PAYE contract model. And of the remaining 55% were outside scope of the legislation, and albeit they won't have required a new contractual engagement model, some of those would have gone through an appeal process, and we would have worked in partnership with our clients to go through that appeal process.
Okay, so if we look at some further statistics, the big number that you can see here is that 61% of temp workers saw a reduction in their take-home pay due to increased tax and NI contributions being taken at source. So we weren't surprised that there was quite a huge amount of noise from disgruntled limited company workers at the initial announcement of the legislation. But actually what we were surprised at was that only 14% of the workers deemed in scope actually decided to appeal the decision. So the vast majority of the limited company workers were accepting of the legislation. And that's reflected too in the fact that only 12% of inside scope workers chose to leave their roles within their clients because their role was deemed to be inside scope of IR35. So this was much less than we were anticipating. And the impact of this we also minimised through skills criticality planning in advance of the legislation with our clients. But another big number here, or the biggest noticeable result that we're seeing now that's remained consistent now, even 6 months on after the legislation's been in place, is that we've seen a 54% reduction in the utilisation of limited companies. And in addition to that, for the vast majority of limited company workers that transition to PAYE, they decided to use umbrella companies. So we've seen a 43% uplift in the utilization of umbrella companies as well. So 6 months on, as Emma referenced, there's still project work that Emma and I need to complete on IR35, but we're fully aware that some of the further analysis is going to be a little bit tricky for us to look at in terms of IR35, the impact that IR35 has had on the marketplace in isolation. And that's due to COVID and also to Brexit pretty much creating a perfect storm for us. So in terms of bigger picture, what are the market trends that we're seeing currently? I would like to share some statistics with you that our CEO, Mike Smith, recently shared on a webinar in partnership with the Everest Group. So the first is there's been a large percentage increase in demand for MSP services, with buyers realizing the benefit of partnering with service providers to manage interim hiring needs in an increasingly complex labour market. Secondly, there's been a huge increase in demand for interim workers as we move out of the COVID cycle. So here in the UK, our staff shortage is reported to be 14 times the normal levels. And definitely from a Randstad SourceRight perspective, our hiring is way back up there at the pre-COVID levels. In addition to that, in a recent Randstad Talent Trends survey, 77% of our clients reported the need for workforce agility being greater than ever. So actually what we're seeing on the ground is that many of our clients are now taking a much more pragmatic approach to the vehicles that they're using to hire and attract interim talent. So they're using more and more frequently a combination of statement of work in addition to freelance plus traditional contingent hiring routes. Unsurprisingly, our clients are also now paying more for their temp workers to secure top talent in those in-scope roles. So at implementation, there was a more cautious approach to protecting costs. And now with an increased demand for certain skill sets, those rates are rising. So quite rightly so, we're also seeing an increased scrutiny on legislative compliance for PAYE workers. So we're working with our clients again to ensure that they've got sound AWR processes, that they're monitoring tenure for their temp workers, and there's increased scrutiny on as well on umbrella providers' operating procedures to make sure that they're in line with best practice processes. So it really is a dynamic and complex marketplace. Finally, we're seeing an increased interest from clients in terms of what technology they can utilize to help support them with these increasingly complex labour market processes. And with that, I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Olaf Patz from OuterScore.
Thank you very much, Marianne. My name is Olaf Patz. I'm the managing director of OuterScore. So we are a young tech company headquartered in Düsseldorf, Germany. And we offer consumerized all-in-one purchasing solutions, both for contingent work and statement of work. And so what differentiates our solution is a fuse of sourcing and legal tech. So the heart of our system are smart algorithms. So that helps us, or you, in the end, to create tailored self-services, to conduct compliance risk assessments, to automate processes in the end, and also to provide decision support for the hiring managers, for example, or procurement department. And that's basically this overview. And we summarized on this slide what we provide in terms of technology for compliance. So basically along the process flow. So one feature I would like to highlight is our anomaly engine. So this allows, in the end, regulatory compliance monitoring and could at least partially replace manual audits also. So you are able, in the end, to define events like, for example, tenure limit exceeded, or compliance check result is above or below a certain limit or score. And determine when something should turn red or yellow, for example, and then also trigger a notification email or just a notification in the system to somebody within your organization. So this is one feature. Others, like, for example, the GDPR, are more like that you're able to hide or show some data, like candidate pictures, names, CVs, and so on. And I also want to explain the gateway, OuterScore gateway, because this is also a central feature which we offer. Just to move on to the next slide here. So this could be your central place for the hiring managers to procure any type of external service or resource across the company. So it's an very intuitive chatbot style self-service that enables the business users to create purchase requisitions. And because it also should avoid worker misclassifications. Yeah. Also, if somebody claims he's doing a statement of work, but then there are some questions to really triggering, is that really a statement of work or hidden misclassification? It also leads to the best matching contract type and also to service specification templates, which fit based on the questions answers given. Yeah, we heard just from Randstad that the HRMC's SES tool is quite popular, but yeah, also about 50% of clients use other tools, especially larger ones. So what could be the advantage of using such a tool like OuterScore Gateway? Well, first of all, it's fully integrated into the sourcing process, as you can see. Yeah, it's a great purchase requisition, what you see here. It allows also the consideration of further information, which might be really relevant, like the job posting or the service specification. You could also optionally upload, if you want to do an additional assessment where the SES tool, for example, upload this, the PDF there. And the big advantage is, that was also mentioned by Paul before, that you can also easily tailor such a tool to your individual needs, yeah? To your sourcing process, your individual workflows, in the end also your risk appetite, and you can yourself, or with the support of lawyers, adjust it to changes in the legislation. So it's fully configurable, which offers quite a few advantages. So the configurations and our algorithms also allow specific checks, for example, for certain occupations, or you could also say, for example, there's a certain budgetary threshold. For example, under a certain budget, you do not need to conduct a check anyway, because the risk is low enough, yeah, so that you would not ask hiring managers to do such a check. Plus, of course, it's also possible to define further sub-questions or free text entries, like how many days have you worked within the last 12 months for a company or outside our company, and so on. So that is all possible with this tool. Plus, we also included a feedback loop, so you could forward the results of the check also to your legal department for review, or also external party, lawyers or other parties, so that they could give feedback, and then there would be the approval, final approval. So you could potentially also or might want to pass parts of the responsibility and risk also down the supply chain, invite agencies or also suppliers, or also the contractors. As we also had, it's also a must, so that you actually forward the results of the check to the contractor. And in our tool, you could not only do this with a check, but build really more comprehensive workflows for onboarding. So send out not only self-disclosures, but also require document uploads and so on. Yeah, that is an overview about pulse checks. So that is also an interesting feature, because as we all know, the rules and specifications change as project progress and evolve. So status determination also needs to be reviewed regularly to ensure ongoing compliance. And our pulse checks automatically trigger a periodic renewal of compliance checks or self-disclosures. You just set it up once, and then it runs automatically and would notify if something is going into the yellow or red area. In the end, everything is also kept in an audit trail, so that it also includes version tracking in case the check has been repeated. So all important steps are in the end recorded, and you can easily prove the respective rules have been implemented in your organization appropriately. You can also, if there would be some audit, easily filter out candidates, the check results, and so on. That is also possible with the audit trail. So yeah, with this slide, I also come to the end of my presentation. Yeah, to sum up, we provide a very consumerized service buying extended workforce cloud solution with a special focus on compliance features that can be tailored to your individual needs. And yeah, we would be glad to demo the system to you anytime, or also provide you with a test system. And with that, I would like to hand over to our friends from Wicoland, to Hans Ulrich. Thank you.
Thank you, Olaf. So I'm Hans Feiberg. I'm the CEO of Wicoland, and Wicoland is a platform and a marketplace for virtual companies, about which we'll talk now a bit more in depth. So to put this into perspective, up to now we've heard about the risks regarding IR35 and compliance, and we've heard about how to control these risks. Now we'll speak about a solution to avoid these risks in the first place. And this solution is based on a change in paradigm. Traditionally, freelancers, independent contractors are onboarded by their clients as single resources in order to take on some task for which there is no employed staff for one reason or the other. And this approach brings about compliance risks, especially with worker classification rules. So misclassifying someone as independent contractor where it's rather an employee relationship. And also this approach is quite effort intensive, as each single freelancer contractor has to be looked for, found, onboarded, coordinated, supervised, paid, which is all quite burdensome. So the paradigm change that this solution proposes goes from the freelancer, the contractor, as an individually contracted resource to whole teams of freelancers which can handle complete projects. Now, it's not any kind of team that will do the job of protecting against worker misclassification risks. What's needed here is a specific structure, a structure that turns a group of freelancers into a reliable supplier that is compliant, of course, but that's also well organized, financially sound, and contractually secure. So we call such a structure, such a freelance contractor structure, a virtual company, or in short, just VICO, because such a VICO combines the strengths of a traditional company with the efficiency and flexibility of the human cloud. So let's have a look what are the key elements of such a VICO, and let's start with those key elements that are key for driving compliance with worker classification rules. So firstly, a client can brief to a VICO for a specified outcome that is without prescribing exactly how to do things. That is then done by the VICO, that is by the freelance side, as it would be done by a real company. So the freelance side, the VICO will author an SOW, a statement of work proposal, and that will define the structure of work of the project and also the work packages, including who does what, when, how, for which price. Thirdly, the VICOs are doing everything they do as independent organizational and legal structures, and that is in legal terms as consortia. And these consortia are self-managing themselves, and they're supported in that by a standard workflow model they can follow. And fifthly, for compliance, it's important that VICOs, like real companies, are paid after delivery and approval according to what has been stipulated, what has been agreed upon in the SOW. And then finally, it is key for compliance that all these items 1 to 5 here in the list are continuously and end-to-end, that is throughout the full project cycle documented in order to have at any time at hand transparency and also, if needed, proof. And under these conditions, a VICO protects against compliance risks because there are no employer-like instructions from the client going to the freelance side, to the VICO, and the VICO, the freelancers, the contractors, are not somehow integrated into the internal business processes of the client. Now, of course, when you look at this, it's quite an effort to implement it unless it's automated. It is key that all these items 1 to 6 are automated to the maximum and that they're integrated with sourcing systems like, for instance, OuterScore we just heard about. And when that is the case, then you have efficiency without a need for the client to recruit or to coordinate contractors and without any overhead in the system. Now my colleague, Niklas Lieb, will now show to you how we implement these compliance and also efficiency driving elements in our platform, in our marketplace, Vicoland. So Niklas, please go ahead.
Thanks, Hans. Hi, everyone. I'm Niklas. I lead the business development department at Vicoland. And as Hans already mentioned, I will now basically walk you through how a project and working with a VICO will actually work with an automated system. And in that, showing you how these 6 VICO elements drive compliance and efficiency if they are automated and integrated. And to start off, the first thing, what happens in a project is that a briefing needs to be created. And it is very important that these briefings ask for specific deliverables, because what we want to mitigate is the risk that we have employer-like instructions and not prescribing someone for how long and who should actually do something. That's why in an automated system, it should be possible to insert a briefing with a specific description, with a start and end date, and with other information. Then in a second step, the team actually needs to get together and kind of structure the offer on how they will work on the briefing. As I just said, they are not told to actually, they're not told to exactly do something, but they already asked for a specific deliverable and therefore need to structure a project. And what is very important here is that the freelance side has its individual business processes. So basically meaning that the client can kind of detach from the freelance side and not including the whole construct, the consortia, into its usual business processes. And how does that exactly work? So that works by having 2 kind of roles within the construct. So that's the VICO lead and that's the VICO members. And the VICO lead basically proposes a structure and specific work packages to the members, to which then they can agree or they can negotiate on if they want to do it for that specific price and for that specific description. And this workflow basically ensures that the VICO themselves define the work packages on how they will work on the briefing. If we move on, you may now think that, okay, that's kind of a lot of effort, because then basically you need to contract with every single one individually and set everything up individually. But that's actually the point of the system and of the VICO team, that you have one contractual reliable partner. And that's why on Vicoland and in a VICO, there's always a general contractor and a subcontractor. So basically the VICOs are set up as independent consortia, which are organizational and legal independent structures. And how does this work in detail? Meaning that you as a client basically always have one contract with the general contractor, and then the VICO in itself self-manages the contracts between each other. So there's always one client contract for the whole project, and then the team in itself basically manages the contract. Then in a project, once basically the briefing, the contractual, the offer is sorted out, we go to the work step where basically the team starts working. And what is also really important here, that everything that happens within executing a project, scope changes, setting up a PM system, that this is defined by the VICO themselves. And that's why in a system, basically the user experience should inherently automate this workflow. So the VICO themselves, the freelance side, should have independent business processes. And that's the case in VICOland, where basically first the VICO members submit their specific tasks to the VICO lead, whereas then the VICO lead can submit a specific milestone to the client and request approval. And this whole workflow is able digitally, and it is integratable with different other systems. So in order to drive the efficiency and also the to make it very easy, I think it needs to be very easy for the VICO to export the whole project plan to a project management system, for example, but also on the client side, make this whole workflow integratable into VMS systems, which are usually the systems used in the procurement departments. And that's why the whole basically task of approving milestones, accepting offers, that can be directly managed through right now SAP Fieldglass and OuterScore. Then the next step is that we get to payment. And here, what is important, as we're dealing with multiple people and not with single resources who collaboratively together create an offer, is that you don't want to pay everyone individually. And that's why on VICOland, you always have one invoice with the general contractor, and then the smart payment system of VICOland automatically handles the distribution of funds within the VICO based on the SOW offer that was made in the beginning. And that just ensures that there's low effort with all administrative tasks on all sides, and that the freelance side has the independent business processes. The most important point in all of this is that this is continuously documented, because it needs to have an auditable transparency that once you get to an audit, you can prove there was a change, we negotiated this, and this was basically what we wanted to do. And that's why on VICOland, every change that is made during a project within the scope and within the SOW, it's automatically put into contract. So contracts are automatically updated so that everyone working on a project has a legal basis at all times. And that just gives hard proof for rightful worker classification. So I think all in all, what is important here is that the system in working with a freelance team needs to make sure that the freelance side has their own business processes, and it needs to drive efficiency. And in the end, what is also important is that all of this integrates into other systems that we have seen today. So into the VMS system, but then also into an MSP program, because this is the only way that ensures you that you can work with all of your contingent workforce compliantly and efficiently. And with this, I'll hand it over to Johannes, who will moderate the questions if you have any.
Yeah, thank you, Niklas and Hans-Ulrich. Yeah, so we had a small journey through the legal, organizational, and technology-wise solutions with regard to IR35 compliance and how they interact. We have a few questions here on the board. So the first is posted by Sharon King, asking, we have individual working on projects with us who does not have their own company. Would this person fall under IR35? I would put this question to Paul and Joe.
Hi, Sharon. The answer is no. But that's partly because the fact that they're an individual anyway means that you should still be doing a check as to whether they're genuinely self-employed, and if they're not, then you would need to deduct payroll taxes. But IR35 itself applies only to those who are using service companies.
Okay, thank you, Paul. We have a next question from Sue. do you test each role or each person coming into the role? I.e., if you hire multiples of the same role, do you apply an abstract CES test just to the role, or do you look at the individual? So maybe we have this answered from both our legal team and also from Randstad, how they approach this. So Marian, would you like to start?
So it's a good question. Thank you, Sue. So I would say from our perspective now, as we're operating in BAU, we would recommend our hiring managers to assess the role, because actually we don't know who's actually going to be found to fulfill that requisition. So it would be the role at this stage that we would then assess to determine if it's in or out of scope. Slightly different situation when we were looking at our incumbent population that were transitioning over, because the hiring managers were answering those CES determinations considering the role that an individual was performing. So I'm sure actually for those answers, their mind was on the individual that was actually performing the role as in question at the time as well. I don't know if you've got a further take on that, Paul or Joe.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think we tend to err on the side of caution and say, you know, unless you have hundreds of people doing a role, which makes it sort of physically impossible or administratively extremely burdensome, we would always recommend doing one CES determination per individual, because that takes into account that whilst you may have numerous people doing one role, the terms of the individual contract may be negotiated, the practical circumstances of those individuals may be different from case to case, and if that's the case, you risk being in a situation where you've lumped everyone together under one CES determination, and those answers end up being inaccurate in certain ways on an individual basis. So unless you have a number of people who are literally identical in terms of the role they're doing, the terms of their contract, the practical circumstances of what they're doing, you know, in the vast majority of cases, we would strongly recommend doing it on an individual basis wherever possible.
Yeah, thank you, Marian and Joe. That's all questions I see on the questions board. So that's really all. If you have any individual questions, please reach out to our speakers. You have the contact details in the presentation that we will circulate. So please feel free to reach out to our network partners, to Taylor Wessing, anyone who can help you. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, we hope to see you soon. And bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.